Sometimes a woman asks herself the question, is it possible to give birth without contractions? No, it is absolutely impossible. I will now tell you a story that confirms this. Once I worked in a maternity hospital where a woman was in the pathology department awaiting her fourth birth. She was pregnant with twins. At that moment, her cervix was dilated by 7 centimeters. Can you imagine? At the same time, she was lying in pathology and was not in labor. So, how did her labor happen? Her amniotic sac was ruptured, which in fact was holding back the start of labor activity. And as soon as it was opened, her contractions began gradually. They began to increase gradually. She, by the way, was afraid that the contractions would be strong immediately, as if at 7 centimeters. And gradually they increased, labor began, and she gave birth. The birth of the twins, by the way, was spontaneous. Thus, this woman did not have labor activity even though there was a dilation of 7 centimeters. She had isthmic cervical insufficiency. This is the inability of the cervix to remain in a closed state during pregnancy. Thus, the answer is negative. The cervix can only open at full term due to contractions. Right now, we are going to understand what labor contractions are, what the approximate duration and dynamics are at each stage of contractions, and how you should behave in order to experience contractions as easily as possible. In this video, I will answer the following questions for you. How to understand that contractions have started. Frequency and duration of contractions. When to go to the maternity hospital. How to behave and ease labor contractions. What to do if there are no dynamics in contractions or if labor is too active. Labor is divided into 3 periods. The very first period is actually the contractions, where the cervix opens from 0 to 10 centimeters. This period lasts on average from 10 to 14 hours. For every woman, it is different. Then comes the second period of labor. On average, it lasts an hour and a half. It begins with full dilation and ends with the birth of the child. And the third period lasts on average up to 30 minutes and ends with the birth of the afterbirth, the placenta, the child's place, the membranes, and the umbilical cord. The first stage of labor is divided into phases, latent and active. At the beginning of labor, the contractions are quite tolerable, and the break is long. The duration of the contraction is short. The break at the beginning of contractions is approximately once every 10 minutes. The duration of each contraction is from 40 seconds. These contractions are tolerable and experienced easily. The latent phase is the longest phase of contractions. It lasts approximately 6 to 8 hours on average for those giving birth for the first time. In the second and subsequent births, it may be somewhat shorter. By the way, how to count contractions? Download a contraction counter app and press the button when the uterus becomes hard. And press again when it has relaxed. Then you will understand the real duration of the contraction. The next phase follows the latent one, the active phase. In this phase, the break between contractions decreases. The break between them is from 2 to 4 minutes. And the duration of the contraction increases. It is from 50 seconds and more. And of course, the perceptibility of the contractions also increases. That is, these contractions are already more noticeable, and a woman cannot, in the process of a contraction in the active phase, talk, drink tea, go somewhere, walk, move, and so on. That is, she definitely needs to stop and breathe through this contraction. She freezes. She cannot talk through it. It is precisely at this stage, in the active phase, that you need to go to the maternity hospital. That is, when the break between contractions is 4 minutes and more frequent, and the duration is more than 50 seconds. And of course, the contractions are regular. Because otherwise, you risk arriving at the maternity hospital too early, and in some countries, they don't even admit you to the maternity hospital if a woman is not in the active phase of labor. The active phase on average lasts from 4 to 6 hours in first births. That is, it is much shorter than the latent phase. The cervix opens faster in it. And even though the intensity is more noticeable, in any case, you will not be in it for too long. When there is already almost full dilation, 9 to 10 centimeters, at this moment, contractions can slow down somewhat, and new sensations appear. A woman may feel the urge to push. At this moment, her emotional state also changes. We will talk about this a bit later. If at this moment, when it is already 9 to 10 seconds of dilation, the contractions slow down, you don't need to panic immediately or run to inject oxytocin. Patient doctors wait through this moment and see what happens next because the uterus is recalibrating. The child at this moment is engaging, screwing into the pelvis, turning there. This time is needed for the uterus to move to the second stage of labor. It needs to adjust. Therefore, there is no need to hurry. If at this moment you give oxytocin and drive the child faster, the child might not finish turning and the second stage of labor might be prolonged. Therefore, so to speak, without panic. And you need to wait a little. For example, I once accompanied a birth, and the contractions were active at first. Active, active. Then they slowed down and became contractions once every 5 minutes, and they became, as if, even more tolerable, much more tolerable than before. The doctor looked at these contractions, and to my surprise, he said that nothing was wrong. Let's endure more, let's wait more, no need to hurry. And indeed, after some time he came in, the contractions became active again, and the child began to descend. Now I am telling you such an average version of how it usually happens and how it happens for most women. But we are all different, and labor proceeds differently for everyone, including from the point of view of contraction dynamics. For example, I had a case when I arrived at the maternity hospital with a future mother, and we watched how the contractions were going. And the contractions were going very, very slowly, once every 5 minutes. The sac was intact. The contractions were very tolerable. She practically didn't interrupt her conversation for a contraction. At some point, the doctor came in and asked, "Well, are we going to give birth or why did we come?" seeing her condition. And then she even talked about maybe they would let us go home because the mother wasn't giving birth. And when he checked the dilation, it turned out that the dilation was already 7 centimeters. So even that happens. It can be absolutely different. And it happens that we arrive at the maternity hospital with a contraction dynamics of once every 3 minutes, with quite noticeable contractions, and there are still 10 hours of labor ahead. That is, everything is very individual. Everything depends on the individual characteristics of the mother, on physiology, on the pain threshold, on the mood and attitude toward labor, and even psychological preparation. Therefore, it is possible to determine the dilation accurately only upon examination. 10 centimeters is full dilation, after which the second stage of labor begins and the child begins to descend, turn, engage in the mother's pelvis, and be born. As I already said, the greatest intensity of sensations is in the active phase of contractions. But at the same time, remember that there is always a painless interval, and if it pulls and hurts between contractions as a rule, this means that the woman is not relaxing enough between contractions. Yes, I agree, it will likely not be possible to relax completely during a contraction. Most likely, it won't work. This is normal. But to relax between contractions is your, so to speak, direct duty because then you will experience fewer sensations. Some women begin to agree to an epidural anesthesia when quite tolerable contractions are still going, thinking that just in case, let's get the epidural, what if it hurts more later? And this should not be done because, in fact, the sensations do change in labor, but these sensations go, as it were, in steps. That is, you experience such a rise in sensations, then endorphins are released, you get used to them. Then there is a rise again. Endorphins are released, you get used to them. Plus, you start to behave differently, find a comfortable pose, find comfortable breathing that anesthetizes you, and immerse yourself more in a trance state. All this helps to cope with these sensations. Therefore, getting an epidural just in case it hurts more later, this should not be done. Research was conducted and it was found that in a vertical position during a contraction, the mother experiences fewer painful sensations in the lower back and lower abdomen than when lying down. Therefore, as a rule, changing the body position even gives the opportunity to avoid some unnecessary medicinal interventions and anesthesia. But it happens that for some mothers, for example, if they spent the whole night without sleep, it is more comfortable and easier to spend some part of labor lying down, and this is also normal. Listen to your body, this is the most important thing, and do as your intuition and your organism tell you, and that will be right. Actually, in maternity hospitals now, of course, they try to allow women free behavior in labor. But if suddenly you ended up in a maternity hospital where this is not possible and they attach a CTG for the whole labor or put in some other IVs and don't allow you to move, then you should understand that first of all, you can also move with a CTG. You can hold the sensor, stand up, change your position. With an IV, you can also move and even carry it with you if you are moving somehow. And in general, according to the protocols of the Ministry of Health during normal labor that does not require constant monitoring of the child's heartbeat, CTG is listened to for 30 minutes once every 3-4 hours. And this will be completely sufficient. Therefore, you can insist if they don't allow you to walk or change your position and force you to lie on a CTG constantly. As for food and drink, according to the recommendations of the Ministry of Health, drinking during labor is possible and necessary. As for food, in the latent phase it is also permissible to eat. In many maternity hospitals in Moscow, they generally bring food during labor to the delivery room, to the labor block, and offer it to women, even without asking what stage of labor she is at. And of course, most women will not eat in the active phase, at least not much, because there is no time to eat. There is something else to do, as they say. But if at some point your strength has run out or labor has been long enough, and even if you eat a piece of chocolate before pushing, nothing bad in principle will come of it. It will dissolve quickly, but it will give you a sufficient amount of strength to then give birth to the child. What is the danger of food in the active phase of labor? The danger is that if suddenly there is vomiting after eating and there is something in the stomach, and at the same time general anesthesia is needed, and it is used extremely rarely now, then there is a danger of aspiration. And of course this is dangerous for the health and life of the mother. But as I already said, general anesthesia is now done extremely rarely. Even if a C-section is done, it is epidural anesthesia. So the probability of such a situation is very small.